The castle filled the forward port, hanging in black like someone had picked up a hillside and forgotten to put it down again. Old stone patched in places with darker blocks, broken turrets, a keep with a steep roof that looked wrong against the stars because there was air around it, a faint haze about as large as a small town. That haze was the bubble, a pocket of atmosphere twisted into place by a field engine no one understood, only measured. I sat strapped into the sled, boots under the tow bar, gloved hands on the guidelines. The sled was a narrow frame, thrusters on the back, just enough mass to shove me across from our little ship to the castle wall without tumbling into vacuum. On the comm, Hob cleared his throat. "You still with me over there, West?" "Trying to decide whether I charge extra for castles," I answered. My suit mic picked up the thin rasp in my voice. Nerves. I pretended otherwise. Hob laughed once, short. "You charge extra for everything." "You keep asking me to come along," I told him. "Makes it a market." He muttered something to the bridge, then came back. "Vector is green. Lines look good. We launch on my mark. Remember, no drift beyond the bubble. If you fall off the edge, I am not coming after you." "Nonsense. You would miss me." "I would miss the paperwork you do, so I do not have to." The sled's thrusters hit between my shoulder blades. The Godwit shrank away, a stubby boat with panels folded tight. Then there was only the castle and the gap of space between. Frontier anomaly work is simple on paper. A thing appears where no thing should be, wrapped in strange physics. The syndicate that ensures frontier stations and ships wants to know whether that thing is a threat, an opportunity, or a cleanup job. That is where a mortuary envoy comes in. My job is to go where people have died or will die soon, figure out why, and write it down in terms the accountants can read. I do rites when families want them, and body inventory when they do not. I specialize in sites where the dead share space with long-lived anomalies. Places that keep going through tricks no one meant to build. The castle loomed closer. The bubble had no visible line, but I felt it when we crossed. A faint shove against the sled. The stars around the stone blurred. The sled's thruster wash left a pale trail in air instead of nothing. "Crossing inner boundary," I muttered. "Copy," Hob answered. "Range about 20 meters and closing." Beyond the bubble, hard vacuum again. The field engine in the castle's belly held just enough environment to keep a crew alive for a long time. Long enough for the people stolen from 14th century Europe to build a religion around it. We did not know yet how many of those people were still alive. The sled bumped against something solid. The frame jarred under me. My teeth clicked together. I looked down. Ancient parapet. Weathered blocks with lichened faces, the kind of stone that should have seen rain and wind instead of starlight. The sled's anchors shot out with a snap and bit into narrow gaps. The line on my harness went taut. Behind me, Coro and Barnes drifted on their own sleds, slightly higher, adjusting position. Coro was young enough that he took all this as training. Barnes had the heavy patience of a man who had survived too many one-quick inspection jobs. "You are on," Hob told us. "Make a hole. Keep your suits sealed until we get a read on what they are breathing, or if they are breathing at all." "Copy." I unstrapped and pulled myself along the line to the wall. The stone up close showed more than age. Hairline cracks where chunks had fallen away. In some places, something darker filled the gaps like cooled slag. Someone had welded the castle to its own patchwork skin. "Looks like load-bearing repairs," I muttered. "You are not billing for consulting," Hob answered. I grinned, though he could not see it. "I will just add a sympathy surcharge." We cut our way into the castle where someone else had already weakened it. Barnes floated beside me, cutter in hand, trimming a broken arch that looked ready to fall off into space. He moved, boots anchored, line looped twice around a damaged merlon. "Whoever patched this, they did it from inside," he said. "They braced the stone against a force coming from out there." "From the bubble," I agreed. "From us. Or rather, from what we were swimming in. An invisible boundary right at the parapet's outer face, where the bubble met vacuum, would press on the stone day and night. After centuries, something had to give. Through the gap we opened, a narrow passage dropped down into darkness. My suit lamp threw a pale cone ahead, picking out a walkway with a low wall on the outer edge, and inner walls dark with damp marks and streaks where hands had run. "Local gravity?" I asked. "About 1/3, Hob answered. "Expect it to swing. The readings are all over the board. That field is tired." "Get in then," Coro urged, "before it gets more tired." He had his cutter on his hip, tether looped, weight forward like a man leaning into a wind. No sense yet of how patient a ruin could be. We went in single file, lines clipped along a rope we hammered into stone. The corridor led down and around, the air going from still to heavy. My suit readouts put the pressure close to standard, the mix just barely breathable. Good enough that whoever lived here, if anyone did not need suits. Someone lived here. I could feel it in the scuffed stone, the patched cracks, the faint, uneven sound of distant metal striking stone once, then again. A rhythm, not a random noise. "Contact protocol," Hob reminded us in my ear. "No weapons raised first, no sudden movements, no broadcasting your employer on the local sound system." "Do we ever?" I asked. "You do not," he answered. "You love to introduce yourself as mortuary envoy for Sevenfold Mutual to everyone with a pulse." "And everyone without," I said. "Try not to open with that, is what I'm asking." I did not promise. We came out into a courtyard skinned with a thin crust of dust. Columns leaned under the strain of uneven gravity, patched with ribs of metal that bent in ways stone could not. On the far side, an archway opened into a larger hall. Beyond that arch, light moved. Not the steady white of ship panels, warm, erratic, from fire or some equivalent. I lifted a hand in a signal. The others stopped. We unhooked from the line and approached the arch with slow steps. My stomach pitched once as we crossed a gravity dip. My boots left the ground, then found it again. The hall beyond had once been grand. High roof with beams blackened by centuries, banners with faded colours. The stone floor had a new layer, metal plates laid poorly, overlapping, and pieces of bone set between them as shims. Torches burned in sconces fixed to those bones. Men stood in that light with long spears and patched armour, watching us. They were not quite like any people I knew. Their limbs were long, fingers extended past normal reach. Some had ribs that showed as sharp ridges, stretched by a lifetime of low pull. Their eyes were large in their pale faces, and every one of them stared at us like we were a storm. At their front stood a man in a robe stitched from pieces of cloth that had once been banners. He held a metal staff taller than himself with a twisted headpiece that crackled, never still. The rods that made up the head were dark with old heat damage. He lifted one hand. We stopped. He studied our suits, the lines on our chests, the visors. When he spoke, the words were rough but not unfamiliar. "You walk as those who came from night," he said in a version of French from very old recordings. "You wear night's skin, and yet you stand within breath." I switched to the closest approximation I had. "We come from ships," I answered, in the same language, slow. "We come to speak, not to claim. I am Declan West, envoy for those who walk where people die." His gaze sharpened. "Envoy of the dead." "More or less." He nodded, thoughtful. "Then you are of the endless night, and not of the stone. I am Prior Garan, first servant of Our Lady of Night, keeper of the walls." Behind me, Coro shifted, weight ready. Barnes murmured over our private channel. "You told him you work for the dead." Real reassuring. "Better than opening with insurance," I muttered back. Garen's men watched every slight motion between us. Hobbs' voice came through on my inner link low. "Remember their control of the field? We do not know what that stick can do." I kept my eyes on Garen. "We saw a tower fall on our way in," I said. "Half of it at least. Was that the endless night?" Garen's face did not change. He tapped the staff once on the stone. The metal head glowed faintly for a breath. "The night takes what it hungers for," he answered. "We choose what to offer." As he spoke, a tremor ran under my boots. Somewhere outside, stone groaned. A deep crack sounded like a tree trunk splitting. Through a narrow window high up the wall, I saw dust drift, then chunks of masonry. A moment later, a whole corner tower pulled away from the castle, slow and terrible. It rotated, stone scraping against invisible resistance, then slipped past something unseen at the edge of the bubble and flew free, tumbling into hard vacuum. Air rushed out after it in a thin torrent that glittered briefly with ice and rubble before the anomaly settled again. Garin had not moved except for that single tap of his staff. Koro swore in my ear. Barnes's breath hitched. Hobb stayed silent, watching through our helmet feeds from the ship. "You choose?" I asked. Garin studied the staff head like a man considering a blade. "This is the heart's finger," he said. "The night drew us here and gave us breath in the space between. The heart under the stone holds that breath. If we do not feed it, the breath goes away. If we do not show fear, the night is merciful." His eyes met mine again. "You walk under my protection now, envoy. Do not cross a doorway without my blessing. Do not touch what is bound. You will keep your coverings until I tell you that the air is safe, even for your soft lungs." A small smile touched his mouth. "And you will not strike at my men, any more than you would strike at the pillars that hold up your own ship." Hobb murmured in my ear, "You accept, or do we try to run right now?" I watched the hole where the tower had been, jagged stone lit by firelight and the distant smear of stars. No one on our little ship had the reach to pull us out of this bubble if Garin decided to collapse it around us. And the field engine that held it all up was exactly the kind of thing the Syndicate wanted. "I accept," I answered. "We want to see your heart." Garin's eyes brightened at that. He turned, lifting the staff. "Then you will come to the crypt," he said. "You will see the night's gift, and you will understand why we stay." He led us through the hall, past men who watched us with that wide, unblinking stare. The monastery feel of it was strong. Banners hung not for glory but to soften bare stone, benches worn by prayer and exhaustion. As we walked, gravity sagged and surged under our boots. Some steps went nearly weightless. Others dragged at my legs. The men around us handled it as if they had grown up in it, which they had. Their gait had a loose bounce to it, like sailors on rough water. We went down narrow stairs into colder air. My suit sensors flagged the trace of burnt fat and something like hot stone, deep and old. The chemical warning sat on my HUD, tied to memories of cremation bays. The crypt chamber opened under the castle's heart. It was wider than the hall, ceiling lost in shadow. Columns held the roof, but they were not only stone. Bones formed the inner cores, spines stiffened with metal, ribs spread like rafters, plated over with thin sheets of alloy, nails driven through bone and into mortar. In the center of the room stood the shrine. No one needed to tell me that was what it was. Every eye in the room turned toward it with the same measured fear. It rose waist-high from the floor, a dome of carved rock fused with mechanical parts that looked decades newer. Cables ran from its base into the stone around, into the bones of the columns. The surface had been chipped away in many shallow bites, each about the size of a hand, exposing dull metal beneath. Men knelt around it with their arms sunk into sockets along the rim, hands hidden inside the stone. Their forearms had a mottled look, veins dark, skin stretched over thickened bones. A slow vibration came up through my boots, through the thin soles, through my legs, the field engine working inside that dome, holding the bubble in shape, keeping this air thick enough to breathe. Garin planted his staff on the floor near the shrine. The kneeling men did not flinch, but their chanting rose a little. "This is the heart," he told me. "The night hurled us into its embrace, tore us from the earth. Men who came from night taught us how to touch the heart and not die. They left us this." He tapped the staff. We chip what we must to feed the walls. We brace the stone when the breath roars. You chip this. I reached out, careful, not touching yet. Only in need, Garen answered. Only a sliver at a time. The night does not give twice to those who waste its gifts. Someone at the far side of the shrine got up at a gesture from one of the robed monks. The man pulled his arm free of the socket with slow dignity. His forearm was slick with a dark sheen, where skin had fused and split around the metal lip. He walked with bare feet toward a narrow side arch. The arch opened to nothing. Beyond it, where you would expect a corridor, there was only black. No stone, no torchlight. Just hard space pressing, the faint glitter of stars. The bubble's edge sat right there, held just off the arch by the engine's force. I could feel the air drawn toward it. Dust skittered across the floor and vanished. The man walked into that arch without hesitation. He raised his arms, face calm. Garen began to pray in that old French, words asking the endless night to receive this soul and return warmth to those left behind. The man stepped through. One instant he was there, skin pale, chest rising. The next his body jerked as the air ripped from his lungs and he was gone, flung into vacuum. The sound came a moment later, a short, brutal slap of pressure leaving. The bubble shuddered. I felt it in the floor, in the cables, in the shrine under my hand. The edge inside the arch rippled inward, sweeping past the doorway, then snapped back. Wind roared through the crypt for a heartbeat, tugging at robes and hair. The surge caught one of our men. Koro had been standing too near the arch, curious. His boots lost contact. The partial pull toward hard vacuum grabbed him and dragged him sideways. His tether stretched to its limit. His body slammed against the inner edge of the doorway, twisting, his arms pinwheeled. Barnes lunged, boots skidding. He grabbed Koro's line with both hands and hauled, teeth bared. The pull fought them, a puppet string trying to drag Koro down the throat of the world. I moved, too late to be first, early enough to help. I threw my weight backward, hand over hand on the line. For a moment we all hung in a balance between the bubble and the vacuum beyond. Then the shrine's vibration deepened. The heart did something I could not name. The pull on Koro's line slackened. We stumbled back together, Koro slamming into the floor at our feet. He gasped, face white behind his visor. His suit had scraped the arch edge. There was a thin groove down one side, but no puncture. Garen watched with bright eyes. You see, he asked. All things are held in the night's palm. Some are taken, some are returned. The heart feels our offerings and knows when to let go. I looked at the chipped dome, at the arm sockets, at the man who had walked through the arch with calm eyes. The castle was not just a ruin. It was a living system, a machine, a faith, a long-term wound in space, and we were inside it now. Later, when we were alone for a moment in a side chamber that had once been a chapel, Hob gripped my shoulder, fingers hard even through the suit. We are leaving, he said quietly. The stained glass above us had broken a long time ago. Someone had patched the hole with metal plates and bone ribs, held together with hand-poured slag. Through those thin seams, the bubble shimmered where it pressed against the patch. I shook my head. We cannot yet. We can. We unclip, we climb out, we fire the sleds. We are not yet down in whatever pit that shrine sits on. We can still burn for open vacuum, cross the bubble, and reach the ship. They control the bubble. I took a breath. You saw that tower go. He tapped his stick, and a part of the wall went with it. Then we leave before he remembers he can do that. He already knows, I answered, and he knows we know. If we run, he will push. If he pushes, this whole structure might go. That engine has been chipped for centuries. The syndicate will want a full report before they decide whether to cut it loose or throw a net over it. I cannot write that report from out there. I have to see how the thing works. Hob laughed once, humorless. Of course, you and your reports. He looked tired. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there when we took this job. The skin on his hands showed fine scars from old burns. "Do you remember Tannhauser Relay?" I asked. "We left too fast then. We guessed about the field signatures. Corporate used that guess to send a salvage crew in with the wrong shields. You saw the list of names." Hobb sighed through his nose. "I remember." "Then you know why I do not guess anymore. I need to see the heart properly. I need to walk where those anchored men are. I need to understand what chip-by-chip siphoning does to that engine. If I do this half-blind again, people die. People are already dying here," he said. "So are people in every site I work." I met his gaze. "The difference is whether more die later because I rushed." He looked away. "You always think you can make a better compromise than the last time." "That is the job," I said. "You get us into strange places. I write the terms by which we pretend those places are manageable." He laughed again, this time with a little warmth. "Fine, envoy. We stay. But you are staying close to me. If your curiosity starts to outpace my sense of risk, I will haul you out by your suit." "That is our usual arrangement," I answered. He clapped my shoulder once, then keyed his comm. "Godwit, you are hearing this. We are staying longer than planned. Keep station. Watch that bubble edge. I do not want to scrape it with our hull." On the bridge, they acknowledged. Our little ship would hang a safe distance from the anomaly, thrusters keeping her steady, eyes on us. For now. Garin gave us quarters that had once housed a minor noble's family. Now they were bare stone with pallet beds and a single metal panel acting as a door. He posted 2 monks outside as much to watch us as to guard us. We took shifts. Koro stayed awake, jittery, watching his suit readouts even though we had taken our helmets off. The air tasted cold and dry, with a bitterness that reminded me of old cathedrals. I walked the room, listening to the castle's shallow breathing. Under my feet, the heart thrummed. The next day, we explored. Alfie came to fetch us. He was younger than most of the monks, his face rounder, his eyes less hollow. His robe hung a little loose on his lanky frame. He introduced himself as an acolyte, a helper, someone who went where the prior did not. "You would see the walls," he told me. "You would see those who keep them standing. The prior gives leave." Hobb, Koro, Barnes and I followed him through corridors where the stone showed a centuries-long argument with gravity. Some stretches tilted enough that we walked at an angle. In others, the floor had been reinforced with ribs of pale bone and metal struts, the original stone worn smooth. Alfie spoke as we walked, more comfortable with us than the older monks. "The night took us long ago," he said, switching to a mix of his own language and the trader tongue we had taught half the frontier. "We were torn from lands with forests and suns and put here. The old stories say it was punishment. The new stories say it was a test." "What do you think?" I asked. He shrugged. "I think we are alive. I think the night speaks when the walls groan. The heart tells us when we must offer more. That is enough." He led us onto a balcony that wrapped around a shaft going deep into the castle. The shaft was ringed with columns that were clearly not just stone. They were men. At least, they had been once. From waist to neck, each column was a torso, stretched, ribs widened and hardened, arms spread to either side, fingers elongated into something like branches. Metal ran along those bones, bolted into each wrist and shoulder. Above each torso, stone continued up and into the ceiling. Below, legs fused into a mass of support limbs, some human, some grown from bone grafted with metal. The faces were there. Still, eyes closed or open, mouths slack or caught in frozen murmurs. "The anchored," Alfie told us. "They hold the weight. They feed the heart." Barnes slowed, hand on the balcony rail. "You grafted them into the support structure." "They grafted themselves," Alfie answered. "They offered their bodies, and the heart took them. Once there were many fewer. Then the night grew angry. The walls shook. Now there are more." He led us around the shaft. The gravity shifted again, lower here so that my boots barely scraped the stone. On the far side, a maintenance ladder ran down the shaft. It had been bolted into stone wherever there was enough room between anchored. We went on, exploring side passages, counting stairwells. At each turn, I watched how the monks moved, where they stepped, which walls they brushed with their fingertips. They treated the anchored like living saints. Some touched bare toes to the stone near their feet, heads bowed. "Do they feel it?" I asked Alfie quietly. "The strain?" Alfie hesitated. "They dream," he answered. "Sometimes they speak, in their sleep. They see the night in ways we do not. But they do not complain." "You would not understand a complaint even if they gave you one," Hob muttered. His voice carried a new roughness. The experience at the arch had shaken him more than he showed. We came to a narrow span that crossed the shaft. A walkway of metal bars and bone bridges, lacking handrails for most of its length. The fall down from there would carry a man past several levels of anchored. "This is where we pass power lines," Alfie explained. "We adjust the bars when the strain changes." Barnes stepped out first. He had the best balance of us, and he had always trusted his feet. The gravity fluttered under us as we stepped onto the bridge. A pocket of near weightlessness hung over the shaft. Barnes's boot found emptiness where he expected pull. His leg kicked out to find purchase, overbalanced. He grabbed for the nearest support. His gloved fingers closed on a piece of bone that had been polished by years of use. The bone cracked. I heard it before I understood it. A sharp, dry snap. The piece Barnes held came away in his hand. His body swung out over the shaft. He swore, flailed for another grip. The bridge jerked under his weight, the bars shifting. Alfie slipped too, the metal under his bare feet slick with frost. He slid toward the edge, arms windmilling. I was closest to Alfie. Hob was closest to Barnes. For a heartbeat, it looked like we could grab both. Both were falling in different directions. I went for Alfie. He slammed into my chest. My boots skidded, but I managed to lock my arms around his middle and brace against a support strut. Hob lunged for Barnes, fingers grazing his wrist, then losing it as gravity let go completely. Barnes floated for a moment, sprawled, face stunned. Then gravity returned from a different direction. It reached up from the shaft, seized him, and dragged him down. He fell through the open gap between anchored. His body bounced off a metal crosspiece, then slammed into one of the supporting torsos. The anchored's fingers punched through his suit and into his ribs like barbed hooks. The impact twisted Barnes's spine. His helmet cracked. Blood misted the air around him in tiny droplets that drifted for a second, then were drawn into the bone and metal like water into dry cloth. The anchored below shuddered. The sound that came next shook the span. A deep thrumming roar from stone and bone as the whole column took the impact and used it. The cables along the anchored's arms lit with a dull glow. Power surged up the shaft. The shrine above and whatever cousins it had below drank it. Alfie whimpered in my arms. Hob froze on his hands and knees, staring down at Barnes's twisted body. The monks gathered quickly, chanting. Some went to the edge of the shaft and extended their hands in blessing. They did not try to pull Barnes free. "The heart has taken him," one murmured. "His offering was accepted." Another said. "Accepted," Hob repeated. He looked at me. If I had gone for Barnes instead of Alfie, I might have grabbed him and braced in time. Or we might both have gone over. There was no way to know. I felt the weight of that assumption settle on my shoulders anyway. We pulled back to the guest chamber after that, movements jerky. Koro had not been on the bridge when Barnes fell. He heard it over comms and now lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling as if it might rip open. I opened a secure channel to the Godwit. "Kingsley is asking for an update," Bob muttered. "You handle it. I need to not put my fist through a bulkhead while I listen to him." Kingsley was our syndicate director out in this sector. He lived on a large station with steady gravity and clean corridors, and he wore suits tailored to show that the deaths of distant strangers sat on his reports as numbers, not ghosts. The tight beam channel snapped into focus in my visor. His face appeared, almost life-sized, floating in my vision. "West," Kingsley began, with that smooth corporate calm. "You are still inside the anomaly." "We are," I answered. "There are survivors. They organize themselves around a field engine in the crypt. They can manipulate the anomaly boundary with a staff, some kind of remote tap into the engine. The inhabitants have mutated to low pull. They have turned some of their own into structural supports. They treat the field engine as a shrine. You confirm the presence of long-term human integration with the field device?" "Yes." Kingsley's eyes sharpened. "That is extremely valuable. Our models suggested it might be possible to have a working example." "They are people," I cut in, "not just proof of concept." He paused, annoyed at the interruption. "Of course they are people, for now. But the device is the asset. Centuries of continuous operation in an extreme environment. Your job is to secure documentation on its design and operation and to determine whether it can be removed. If you can seize control of it, do so. If you cannot, we have a fallback." The knot in my chest tightened. "What fallback?" "If the device cannot be recovered, and we cannot rely on the locals to keep it contained, we will neutralize it. The anomaly would collapse. Yes, the inhabitants would die. The board is prepared for that outcome." "You are talking about a full kill of the site." "I'm talking about removing a hazard. If the device fails on its own, it could throw fragments of that bubble into shipping lanes. Better to control the moment and direction of collapse." "And us?" I asked. Kingsley hesitated just long enough for the truth. "You are aware of the risk," he answered. "If you must die to remove a threat, your contract covers your beneficiaries. You knew that when you took this posting, Declan." "Understood," I replied. "And Hob? The crew?" "You are all covered." Which also meant we were all expendable. "West," Kingsley went on, voice lighter. "You will not get a cleaner project in your career. This is textbook. Long-term anomaly, native adaptation, integrated field usage. Deliver me a full profile and evidence of control, and you will never want for work. Fail to secure it, and we wipe the site." Behind his polished words, I heard an echo of the last big job that had gone badly. The relay that ripped itself apart because I wrote a report that left room for optimistic planners to gamble. I thought of Barnes's body hanging on those bone hooks. "I will deliver what I can," I answered. "I expect you to do more than that," Kingsley said. He cut the channel. I took a breath. It did not help much. When I lifted my head, Hob was in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "Did he offer you a bonus to screw us?" he asked quietly. "Something like that." "You going to take it?" "I told him I would deliver what I can," I answered. I did not tell him which direction. "You know how this plays. He will not let this thing float around uncontrolled if he can help it." "I know," I said. "And you think you can find a middle route?" "Again." "I know what I am good at," I answered. He stepped into the room, rubbing the back of his neck. "Garen wants another right. With me." The memory of the prior tapping his staff on the stone floor returned, the tower sliding off into space. The man walking into the arch without fear. "What kind of right?" I asked. "Something about marking guests. He thinks the knight has taken an interest in me. I figure I do not have a choice. If I refuse, he can kick us back out to the edge of the bubble and let the field engine sort it out." He looked tired again, but there was iron in his voice. "I will be there," I told him. He gave me a short, sharp nod. "You would be there even if I did not want you to. Mortuary habit." They strapped Hob to a metal frame in the great hall. The frame looked like something built from spare parts of the shrine. Bent rods, bolts driven in at uneven intervals, cables trailing from their ends into the floor. Hob lay back against a rough plate, arms spread, boots braced. Garen and his monks murmured in the old tongue. Torches smoked on the walls. We had our helmets off, The air was thin enough to make my head light. "The night has touched you," Garin intoned, standing at Hobbs' feet. "You saw the offering at the arch and did not turn away. You walked where the anchored hold the walls. You argued with envy and fear." "I argued with you," Hobb muttered. Garin smiled faintly. "It is all the same under the night. She does not mind. She minds only cowardice." He lifted the staff and placed its head against Hobbs' chest, over the sternum. "Wait," I said. Garin turned his head slightly. "If you feed the heart through him," I asked, "what happens?" "Nothing the night does not will," Garin answered. "His body will either break or bend. If he breaks, he is offered. If he bends, he is marked as ours." I looked at Hobb. He grinned at me without humor. "I have had worse initiations," he said. "Try to take notes." "Do not let him melt you," I said. "I do not want to find a new captain." The monks laughed. Even Garin's smile widened. "Let it be so," the prior murmured. "The night does not like replacements." He closed his eyes and struck the staff once against the metal under Hobb. The sound rang through the hall. The staff head flared with bright light. Field energy poured through Hobb. His body arched against the frame. For a moment I thought his back would snap. Cords stood out in his neck. His fingers clawed at empty air. Bones began to move. It was not a neat process. Ribs thickened under his skin, pushing it out in ridges. His spine pressed forward, then settled deeper into the plate, as if the metal was giving way for it. Fine cracks chased along his arms as bones expanded, then filled in with denser material. His face twisted, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in a raw sound that scraped my ears. I caught the sharp smell of singed hair and hot sweat. It mixed with the old, burnt fat in the hall and made my stomach roil. Garin watched, lips moving. The monks around him whispered responses, a low chain of sound. The surge lasted only a few heartbeats. Then the staff's glow dimmed. Hobbs' back hit the plate again, his chest heaved, his fingers flexed. I stepped close, ignoring Garin's flick of disapproval. "You alive?" I asked. Hobbs' eyes opened. They looked larger now, the pupils wider, the whites threaded with tiny red lines. "I feel like I swallowed a small star," he rasped. "Other than that, delightful." His skin was slick with sweat. Where the staff had pressed his chest, the bones stood out more than before, as if they had grown while the muscle tried to keep up. Alfie hovered nearby, eyes wide. "He bears the mark," the young monk whispered. "The night bent him." Garin placed a hand on Hobbs' forehead for a moment, fingers still. "He is touched," Garin agreed. "He belongs at the heart's side now. The night will want him close." Hobb looked at me. "I hate that I half agree with him," he muttered. A faint vibration ran up through the frame. Hobb winced, then focused on something I could not sense. "You feel that?" he asked. I frowned. "Feel what?" "The engine," he breathed. "It feels like a slow drum, upsetting the balance at the edge. It is wrong, Declan. It has been wrong for a long time." Garin's gaze flicked to him, interest sharpening. "You hear her voice," the prior murmured. "Good. You will help us keep the balance. You will stand in my place one day when the walls crack." Hobbs snarled. "I stand where I choose." "For now," Garin answered. It was Alfie who took us to the upper tower. After the rite, after Hobb had rested, after we had convinced Corro that no, his captain was not going to turn inside out overnight, Alfie appeared in our doorway breathless. "The prior gives leave," he told me. "He says the night has chosen you as arbiter. You may see the Tower of Relics." "Relics," I repeated. "From whom?" "From those who came before," Alfie answered. "From men like you." Hobb grimaced. "Great. More reminders that our line of work has a short history and a shorter life expectancy." We followed Alfie upward through tighter and tighter stairwells. The bubble's edge had a presence here, pressing against the outer walls. The tower room at the top had no windows. Banners had been torn down to make space on the walls for other trophies. Helmets hung there, some shaped like ancient pots, others like modern pressure suits. A few were dented, cracked, or stained. Pressure suits from ships like ours lay neatly folded on shelves, the fabric cut and re-sewn into parts of the monks' robes. In the center of the room, set on a raised stone platform, stood a spiral built from bones. Skulls and thigh bones and ribs, threaded with metal rods, climbed in a coil up to a second, smaller field device. This one sat in a cradle of old hull plates. I knew that device. Not in detail, not intimately. But the design, the way the casing fit around the inner ring of channels, the ports for power feed and control rods. It looked very much like the early prototypes in the training sim my division used to teach us about field engines. Hob walked around the base of the spiral, fingers hovering over the metal plates. "They have been busy," he muttered. Alfie watched us with pride. "The men from Night brought this," he explained. "They tried to lift the heart from its place. The Night would not let them. It threw them down. We took their gifts and learned from them. We built our own ways of touching the heart from their teachings." I stepped closer to the device. A plate had been pried off one side, exposing the inner arrangements. Someone had etched symbols on the exposed metal. Not religious icons, but notes. Arrows pointing to channels, comments in a mix of Latin and trader script. My own training manual used the same short marks, the same shorthand for "stress sinks here," and "do not breach this line unless prepared to die." My hand drifted to the edge of the plate. My fingers traced one particular mark. "That is our notation," I whispered. "Our field division. These men were ours." I saw the story now. The Syndicate had not just found this anomaly. They had discovered it decades earlier, maybe more, and had tried to move the engine. They had sent a team with devices like this small cousin of the shrine. The team had failed and died. The monks had taken the hardware, turned it into a relic, and built a religion around the procedures they thought they understood. Kingsley had talked about models and expectations. He had not mentioned that this castle was one of their old experiments come home to roost. "Declan," Hob murmured. I looked up. He was staring at a rusted plate bolted to the base of the spiral. Someone had carved words into it with a narrow tool. They were in our Syndicate's standardized script. "In case of collapse, abandon site, no retrieval," Hob read aloud. "That is not promising." Alfie frowned. "You can read that?" "We can," I answered. "Our employers wrote it." My stomach gave a slow, unpleasant twist. I had taken this job thinking I was evaluating a new anomaly, an unknown. That meant my report mattered. That meant no one else had walked this path and failed in ways I should learn from. Now, standing in this tower full of their things, touching their notes, I realized I was simply another iteration. A later envoy in a chain of envoys. A man being asked, in kinder words, to do what those others could not. "You knew," I muttered, directing it at Kingsley even though he could not hear me. "You knew, and you sent us anyway." Hob watched my face. "You look like you want to bite someone," he observed. "I like to know when I'm walking in the footprints of ghosts," I answered. "It matters. It changes how you step." He glanced at the device again. "Do you see a way to make this less of a slow-motion disaster?" I did. The notes etched into the metal showed a pattern. The earlier team had realized the engine in the crypt was not meant to feed dozens of anchored. It was designed to anchor one host entirely. All those columns in the shaft, all those partial grafts were jury-rigged by desperate people who had never seen the original schematics. If you retuned the channels, if you created a proper core, if you bound a single body at the heart with enough control over the field, you could stabilize the bubble for decades, maybe centuries. You could also trap that mind in stone and pain. My fingers tightened on the plate edge. "I might," I answered. Hob looked at me carefully. "Does your plan involve fewer deaths than Kingsley's?" "Fewer," I said. "Not none." "Of course," he murmured. Alfie watched us both, trying to piece together the meaning. You can help the heart? He asked. I can make it last longer, I answered, and less likely to rip another tower off without warning. But the night will demand a very large offering. Alfie's face lit. Then you must speak to the prior. This is the prophecy. I blinked. You have a prophecy. Of course, he answered. The heart told us. A walker from night would come, one who understands the old marks. He would either break our world or take the throne of stone. Hob groaned. You forgot to mention the throne prophecy, Declan. You know how I feel about prophecies. I was never given a memo, I answered. Alfie shook his head earnestly. We do not write them. We speak them. The old anchored whisper them in their dreams. Hob rubbed his temples. Wonderful. So we have your employers on one side, their old experiment around us, and a religious script that either kills us or nails one of us into the wall as a permanent feature. He looked at me. Please tell me your middle route can handle all that, he said. It will have to, because I was done feeding neat reports to men like Kingsley who never smelled burnt bone. Because I could not look at Barnes's body on those hooks and agree that the safest option was to pull the pin on the grenade and walk away. Because Hob had trusted me over and over, and I was not keen on rewarding that with an anonymous name on an asset write-down. Here is what we do, I went on. We go to the crypt. We seize the shrine. We reroute the channels. We build the proper core. We bind someone who can control it. Hob's eyebrows climbed. Someone, he repeated. You have a particular someone in mind. I am open to volunteers, I said. Starting with myself. He snorted. Of course you are. We did not plan for long. Planning in detail is a luxury for people who are not standing on a fault line. We went back to our quarters. I laid it out for Koro in a few sentences. Alfie brought 2 younger monks he trusted, ones who had questioned Garen's harshness in whispers. They listened, eyes wide. We must control the shrine, I explained. If Garen holds the staff, he holds the bubble edge. If your people keep chipping at the engine the way they have been, the heart will fail and take us all with it. The only way I see through is to accelerate what was always going to happen. Bind one of us fully instead of letting the castle catch whoever happens to fall in the wrong place. The throne of stone. The engineer in me calls it a single-point anchor, I answered. The priest in me calls it an abomination. The employee in me calls it liability. But the man who watched Barnes die calls it maybe, possibly the least bad option. Hob leaned against the wall, arms folded over his altered chest. And Kingsley? Kingsley wants the engine, or craters, I said. He does not care how. He has drones, he has charges. If he thinks we cannot give him control, he will hit the shrine from outside. That will collapse everything in a very uncontrolled fashion. Then we move before he makes that call, Hob decided. We take the shrine, we lock it into your plan, and we get whoever we can out the door. He looked down at his own hands, flexing them. The bones under his skin had a new density. When he gripped the bed frame, the metal creaked. Whoever we can, he repeated. Alfie drew a shaky breath. The anchored will not abandon their posts. They will not have to, I answered. If we get this right, they will become redundant. It was not the exact word I wanted, but there was no kind version. We marched to the crypt. The castle around us was already showing new stress. Hairline fractures in walls we had not noticed before now traced fine lines along corridors. The air pressure dipped and rose in ways my lungs did not like. Men moved quicker, glancing at ceilings, at the stone under their feet. In the shaft with the anchored, some of those frozen faces twitched. Hob walked beside me, staff in his hand. Garen had let him carry it after the rite as a proof of trust. The metal felt heavy even from a distance, as if it held more than its own mass. Alfie and his monks flanked us. Koro brought up the rear, weapon slung but ready. We reached the crypt and found Garen already there. Of course he was. The heart would have whispered to him if anyone approached with ill intent. He stood near the shrine, robes neat, eyes bright. You come with purpose, he observed. Always, I answered. He glanced at the staff in Hobb's hand. The night has twisted you toward the heart, he said. You hear her now. I hear something, Hobb answered. It is not a hymn. Garin stepped closer, hands spread in what might have been welcome, might have been command. You are not ready to do what you think you will do, he told us. The heart is not a toy for shipmen and their masters. It is a gift. We have tended it for lifetimes. You will leave it to us. Your tending is killing you, I replied. Slowly, ugly, you chip at a device built for a different purpose and call it devotion. Your anchored die on the walls one by one, held together with bolts and prayer. The bubble fails in bits. You call each failure a sign. It is just physics, grinding you down. Garen's eyes narrowed. You speak as if you know better than the heart itself. I speak as someone who can read the old marks on your relic. The men you turned into saints were my guild brothers. They left their notes on that small engine upstairs. They built this shrine in the first place. They knew what it was meant to do, and they died because no one listened when it did something else. Alfie shifted at my side, glancing between us. Garen lifted his chin. And you, Envoy? You think you can do better? You think you can stand where the anchored stand and not scream? I think I can choose how and when someone screams, which is not noble, but it is honest. We are going to reconfigure the shrine. Either you help, or you get out of the way. The monks behind Garen tensed. Some reached for tools or weapons. Garen smiled. You think you can threaten me with my own walls? I have walked them longer than you have been alive. I can pinch the bubble at your ship's throat and watch it spin away. He lifted a hand, clearly intending to call down the bubble edge as he had before. Hobb did not give him the chance. The captain lunged, faster than I had ever seen him move. Whatever the engine had done to his bones had made him quicker. He slammed the staff forward, aiming for Garen's midsection. Garen grabbed the staff head with both hands, fighting for control. The two men strained against each other, arms shaking. The shrine felt their struggle. The vibration under my boots sharpened. Air pressure climbed, then dropped. Torches flared. The monks around us cried out, some falling to their knees, some rushing forward. Koro pivoted his weapon and fired a warning burst into the ceiling. Dust rained down. The monks hesitated. Alfie yelled something in their tongue, urgent, trying to hold back his own people. Hobb and Garen wrestled with the staff in front of the shrine. Their boot heels carved grooves in the dust. The staff tip slipped sideways and struck one of the arm sockets in the shrine's rim. Light flared. The engine reached up through the shrine and through the staff and through both men. Garen screamed. Hobb grunted. For a moment, both were suspended on a bridge invisible to the rest of us. Then the field chose. Garen's arms snapped straight. The staff slammed down, pinning his hands against the shrine. The stone around the socket softened like wax and swallowed his wrists. His forearms sank into the shrine up to the elbow. His chest hit the edge of the dome, ribs compressing, then stretching, then merging with carved stone. He gasped, eyes wide as the shrine drank him. Hobb staggered backward, smoking, the staff still locked under Garen's fingers. The handle was fused to the shrine now, part of a new, ugly protrusion where flesh and metal and rock met. The vibration under my boots steadied for a moment, then rose to a new level. Garen's face twisted. His mouth shaped words I could not hear. The sound coming out of him was lower than speech, more like deep machinery under strain. The monks froze. Their leader was now part of the heart. Alfie whispered a prayer under his breath. This is what I meant, I told him. This is what happens when the heart chooses someone at random. Alfie lowered his head. He is blessed, he whispered. He is trapped, I snapped. That is not the same thing. We had seconds before shock turned to rage. Hobb, I hissed. The channels, now! He shook off his daze, staggered forward, and planted his altered hands against the shrine, feeling for strain. It is ready to tear itself apart, he rasped. You push it any harder and we will all be part of the wall. Then we make that push count. I pulled tools from my pack, cutting charges meant for hull repair, fiber lines, clamps. Alfie watched, startled, as I placed them at key junctions in the shrine's outer channels. What are you doing? Closing off all the extra loops you added when you built those anchored. This engine was built to feed one host. All your side channels are making it bleed out through too many wounds. The monks around us began to stir. Some wept near Garen's partial body. Others glared at me. Koro shifted position to keep his weapon visible without aiming it directly at anyone. Alfie's two allies murmured to their fellows, trying to keep them from rushing us. I worked quickly, tracing the lines where bone and metal carried energy away from the shrine. I clamped some, cut others, reattached cables to new points. Each change made the vibration shift. Hob hissed every time the field lurched. You are cutting nerves and tying them together again. He grunted. It is ugly. It is surgery. On a patient no one expected to live this long. You are not helping my sense of well-being, he muttered. We were halfway through when the ceiling cracked. The Godwit's drone came through the stone like a thrown hammer. It punched a jagged hole in the high-vaulted ceiling, trailing dust and shards from the floors above. It dropped on a burst from its own thrusters and hovered over the shrine, metal shells scarred, guns extending. A small projector flickered under its nose. Director Kingsley's face appeared again, larger than life this time, hanging in the dusty air. Declan, his projected image said, you have forced my hand. Of course he had a channel. Of course he had been watching. You did not respond to my last query, Kingsley went on. My instruments show wild fluctuations in the anomaly. You have not established control. That leaves me with one option. Hob glared up at the projection. And that is dropping a mass driver charge on us, he snapped. Kingsley's image tilted its head slightly, as if noticing him for the first time. Captain Hob, he said, you accepted the same contract as the envoy. You knew the risks. I will be brief. You have a short window to back away from the shrine. When the charge detonates, the field engine will fail. The bubble will collapse. Yes, that will kill everyone inside. It will also remove a threat to our clients. I have cleared it with the board. Of course you have, I muttered. The drone's guns tracked down, aiming at the shrine. The monks gasped, some dropping to their knees, hands clasped. Alfie clutched my arm. You brought this here, he whispered. Kingsley brought this here. I only gave him the excuse. Hob shoved off from the shrine, stumbling. You gonna talk him down? There is no talking him down. He has his perfect kill. If we plead, all we do is make him feel guilty. So what, you tackle the drone? Hob demanded. Something like that. The shrine's vibration had settled into a new rhythm under my feet. There were fewer leaks now, fewer patches feeding the anchored, more power building in the core. The drone blended into that vibration in my head, a tool, a piece of metal sitting in a field it did not fully understand. I grabbed the staff where it fused into the shrine, just above Garen's trapped hands. His eyes rolled towards me, pupils wide. Heat radiated off him. Borrowing this, I muttered. I braced my feet and pulled. The staff would not move, but it did not have to. I focused on the connection instead. The staff linked the shrine to the bubble edge. It also linked briefly to anything in its immediate arc. When Garen had tapped the floor, a tower had fallen off the castle. I did not have time to learn how to use it properly. Improvised usage would have to do. I slammed the staff head against the shrine's rim hard. Field energy surged up through the staff, through my arms, through my ribs. It felt like my bones were full of ground glass and wildfire. My vision went white at the edges. The surge leapt from the staff head to the drone. The machine jerked, its guns spasmed. The charge in its belly whined. Kingsley's projected face warped, flickering, then stretched into nonsense and vanished. For a second, the drone hung there, caught between energies. Then the metal shell crumpled inward, like a can crushed by an invisible hand. Sparks spat out. The charge discharged into the drone's own body instead of the shrine. The machine dropped like a dead insect, hit the floor hard and lay there smoking. The air in the crypt had turned sharp and dry. A few monks sobbed openly now. Others stared at me like I had grown a second skull. Hobbs staggered back to the shrine, eyes wild. "You just severed our last line to the Syndicate," he growled. "I severed our last line to Kingsley's plan to kill all of us. And to rescue," Koro added quietly. If Kingsley was willing to drop that charge, he was not planning to rescue anyone. He has written us off. The Godwit either fled or left on his orders. We are on our own. It hurt to say it. Hurt more to know it was true. Hobb nodded once. "Fine," he said. "Then we finish your abomination." We had turned off most of the side channels. The shrine was more focused now, pushing more power through the core and less into the walls. The anchored in the shaft groaned as their burden shifted. Some of the cables threaded through their arms went slack. We needed a central host. The prophecy called it a throne. The notes downstairs called it a single-point anchor. Alfie looked at it and saw both. We stood around the shrine, its dome warm under our hands. Garen's torso stuck half out of it, panting silently, eyes rolling. "The engine can stabilize itself with one fully bound controller," I explained. "Someone who can feel the field and adjust for strain. Someone whose nerves are already partly rewired." Hobbs snorted. "Do not dress it up, Declan. Someone who sits in this thing forever and keeps the walls from falling." "Forever is a strong word," I answered. "Decades, maybe. Time until wear and tear wins." "The throne of stone," he whispered. "Yes." Hobb leaned both hands on the shrine, eyes closed. His fingers dug into grooves on the stone. His altered bones responded to the engine's throbbing rhythm in ways mine could not. "I can feel where it is weakest," he murmured. "I can feel the bubble pulling at the far edges. It is like holding a net while something big presses against it." "Then you would make an excellent anchor," I said. His eyes opened. He looked at me, mouth twisting. "Of course I would." The monks around us listened, tears on some faces, fury on others. Garen's partial binding had split them. Some wanted to free him, which was impossible. Others saw his fate as punishment for arrogance. A few, like Alfie, saw the chance for a different future. Koro watched the door, weapon ready. His face had gone numb, like he had spent all his outrage and had only focus left. I met Hobbs' gaze. "If I take the throne," I told him, "I will hold as long as I can. You get Alfie and whoever else you can convince to leave up to the tower. There are emergency capsules there, stowed with the old gear. They can reach a shipping lane in some undefined number of months if the trajectory works." "Capsules?" Koro frowned. "We did not see those. You did not look behind the stacked plates. The earlier team always brought their own exits." Hobb shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "No," I repeated. "You are not taking this alone. You are the one who keeps trying to manage horrors instead of refusing them. You are the one who writes neat reports that let men like Kingsley sleep at night. You are not going to make yourself into a quiet sacrifice while I run away in a tin can." "That is exactly what I was planning," I answered. "Of course it was. You also always think dying fixes guilt. It does not." He took a breath. "I hear the engine," he went on. "It hears me. That ugly right Garen did wired me into it whether I wanted that or not. I am the one already halfway bound. It makes sense. You are also the only captain I trust. If anyone is going to shepherd survivors through the dark in a tin can, it should be you." He laughed once. "You always did like to delegate." "Hobb." He lifted a hand. "Shut up," he said. "Here is what we are going to do. You finish closing those side channels. You make sure this shrine can take one of us without ripping apart. I will climb in. Alfie will turn the key." "I will not," Alfie protested. "You will," Hobb told him. "If you want any of your brothers to see another sunrise, You will. Alfie's mouth worked. We do not have sunrises. You know what I mean. I opened my mouth to argue again. I saw Barnes in the shaft, caught on those hooks. I saw the relay collapse years back, names on a list. I saw the partial binding that had trapped Garen. I saw Hob in the sled, cracking jokes on the way to a ruin. My tongue stuck to my teeth. The truth was, he was right on one point. The right had changed him. The engine already knew his bones. I did not have the right to take his choice from him. Not again. Fine, I breathed. We do it your way, but we do it fast. The walls do not like how long we are taking. Cracks had spread along the ceiling during our talk. Dust fell in slow drifts. The chant of the monks had shifted to a lower, more urgent tone. We worked together without further argument. I sealed the last of the side branches, tying cables into a tighter core. Hob stripped off his upper clothes, leaving chest and arms bare. His skin had already changed. The bones under it bulged and shifted, the result of Garen's right. He looked almost like the anchored in early stages. He climbed onto the shrine. The central hollow that had once held only a tangle of channels was now open, ready. I had cut away some stone, carving a space roughly the size of a man's torso. At its edges, sockets waited for forearms and spine. Hob lay back, pressing himself into that space. The fit was not perfect, it was never meant to be, but the field engine adjusted for it. The stone around him softened as if heated, then wrapped around his ribs. He grunted. Do it, he hissed. Alfie stood at the foot of the shrine, wide-eyed. His fingers hovered over the controls we had improvised, an arrangement of lever and contact plate that linked several of the core channels. I do not know which sequence, he whispered. You press them all down, Hob rasped. In this order, the heart will do the rest. He rattled off the pattern. Alfie nodded. I stood at Hob's side. His hand found mine. His grip was iron. You do not have to do this, I told him quietly. You do not either, but we both know one of us will. You chose enough today. Let me take this one. He met my eyes. There were tears there, barely held. If you ever write a report about this, he murmured, make sure they know I told you to run. If I ever meet Kingsley again, I answered, I will show him this room and tell him to kneel. Hob snorted. That would be worth haunting you for. He squeezed my hand once more, then let go and rested his arms in the sockets. His forearms slid into place up to the elbow. We had lined the interiors with metal plates from the smaller device upstairs. They matched his altered bones better than stone alone would have. Alfie drew a breath, then began the activation. He pressed the levers in the pattern Hob had given him. The shrine took hold. Hob stiffened. His back arched. The stone under his spine flowed up and over his vertebrae, fusing them to the dome. His ribs sprouted thin extensions that reached into channels, knitting bone to metal. His mouth opened in a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite anything else. His eyes rolled back, then snapped forward again, fixing on a point none of us could see. The field engine drank him. Energy poured up through the shrine, through his altered nervous system, into the bubble. The vibration under my boots shifted once more, settling into a deeper, steadier rhythm. Cracks in the ceiling stopped growing. The fine dust in the air settled. The anchored in the shaft let out a collective breath. Some sagged in their bindings as cables along their arms slackened further. Hob's face held. It was distorted, drawn tight, but still his. He blinked once, twice. You still with us? I whispered. His eyes tracked to me. His lips moved. Barely, he breathed. But it will do. His voice held within it a new note, low and old. The engine's voice under his. You need to go, before I change my mind and keep you all here as decorative supports. I laughed, a raw sound. Alfie stood frozen, hands on the levers. Can we leave him? He asked, horrified. We do not have a choice. Hob's gaze shifted past me, toward the tower. Capsules, he rasped. Take Alfie. Take whoever will fit. Get out of my field. Coro touched my arm. "We have to move," he murmured, "before someone decides we should all stay and worship instead." He was right. The monks were in shock now. In a few minutes they would start to process what they were seeing. Their new anchor, their half-bound prior, the stranger who had cut their shrine and forced a new shape onto their faith. I leaned in close to Hob. "Thank you," I told him. "Bring back a story worth this," he whispered. Then the engine pulled his attention away. His eyes lost focus as he watched stresses at the bubble edge only he could feel. Alfie wept as we dragged him away. We moved fast. I shouted for volunteers as we crossed halls, men who wanted to leave with us to try their chances in a capsule. Some shook their heads. This castle was their world. Others stepped forward, hands trembling, drawn by the thought of something beyond stone. In the end, we had a handful. Alfie, Coro. Two younger monks who had never known anything but the castle and yet were brave enough to step beyond. The Tower of Relics waited at the top of its stair. The device in the center of the room sat quiet, no longer the only heart in the building. Behind the stacked hull plates along one wall, just as I had promised, we found the emergency capsule. It was smaller than our sleds, a stubby cylinder big enough for perhaps half a dozen people if they did not mind closeness. Its thrusters were battered but intact. Its interior smelled of stale filters and old lubricant, a last, sharp whiff of another life. We strapped in. The capsule's controls still worked. The earlier team had left it armed and ready, and the monks had never learned how to fire it. As I slid into the pilot's seat, Alfie clutched the back of my chair. "The Knight will be angry," he whispered. "She has a new friend to talk to. She might be busy." I keyed the hatch shut. The seals groaned, then held. Outside, the castle shuddered once, then steadied as Hob settled deeper into the shrine. The bubble's inner surface smoothed out. The stress readings on the capsule's panel slid toward tolerable ranges. "Here we go," I muttered. I fired the capsule's thrusters. The little cylinder lurched, then shot forward along the guide rails someone had built long ago. It punched through a small port they had lined with bone and metal, out into the hazy air of the bubble. The castle swung past the port in my forward view. A mass of stone and patchwork metal, ribs and towers, banners and bone. We coasted toward the bubble's inner edge. The capsule's hull hummed as field forces wrapped around it. For a moment, it felt like we pressed against thick glass. Then we were through. Vacuum swallowed us with its patient embrace. The stars sharpened. The castle shrank behind us as the capsule's thrusters fired in a long, steady burn. I could not see the godwit. Either Kingsley had pulled it away, or something worse had happened. The capsule's navigation system spun up a slow, cautious course toward the nearest known route. Months of drift, maybe more, before any sane traffic lane. That would be a problem for later. In the capsule's narrow nose, a small round port looked back at the castle. I unbuckled, ignoring Coro's muttered protest, and floated to it. The castle turned slowly in the distance, held in position by the bubble Hob now controlled. One high tower stood a little straighter than the others. A window in that tower glowed with a steady light, not fire, not torch. Something nearer to the engine's glow. In that window, the shape of stone and metal had fused into a figure. It looked like a man kneeling, shoulders hunched, arms bound out to either side. The impression was not perfect. You could blame it on broken masonry and melted supports. But my mind placed Hob there all the same. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small stone icon Garen had once worn at his belt. It showed a circle with a jagged line through it, their symbol for the endless night. I had taken it without really knowing why. I set the icon on the console in front of the port. "You have your throne," I murmured to the distant tower. "You have your anchor. You have your own kind of god now." Alfie floated beside me, eyes bright with tears. "He will hold us," he whispered. "He will hold the walls." "He will," I answered. because that is who he is. And I would live with that, with the knowledge that I had put him there, in part, that my need to make horrors tidy had found a new form. The capsule continued its slow burn. The castle shrank by degrees. The window with the kneeling figure became a tiny point of light, then nothing at all. The icon on the console sat where I had placed it, the carved line of the endless night cutting the circle in half. I watched that tiny, disappearing shape until the stars around it blurred, and only then looked away.